This is an overview of the midterm one study guide. So let's start with question number 1. Question number 1 is from chapter 3, and it looks like a lengthy question, but that's because parts of it are long. I had to give you more detail. So part A, describe in detail the backlash to the civil rights movement from whites and explain how racial polarization led to the creation of the Southern Strategy. All right, so the first part of this prompt, you focus on the civil rights movement and the backlash from whites. So make sure you're going into some detail here about how white people reacted, not all, of course, but how many white people, particularly in the South, reacted to the civil rights movement. Also explain what racial polarization is and tie that to the creation of the Southern Strategy. And again, explain what the Southern Strategy is. Part B, think about these recent events. And there are two things here. The Black Lives Matter protests across the US during the late spring and early summer of 2020. Remember, this was after George Floyd was murdered by the officers in, I want to say Minneapolis, but now I'm not sure. But you know which one I'm talking about. So if you look up George Floyd and BLM protests, you'll find a lot of information if you are not familiar with that time period. The other situation is the storming of the US Capitol. And I only use that word because I don't necessarily have a better word. Some people call them riots. I'll just use that term, storming of the US Capitol building on January 6th, 2021. I hope that you're all familiar with this occurrence at the Capitol building. Many of the protesters who had attended the rally of former President Donald Trump subsequently went over to the US Capitol building, and many of them were able to break into the Capitol building because it is closed to the public. And so compare those two incidents, those two events. Do you think there was any difference in how people who were part of these events were described and treated differently? Why or why not? Okay, so it doesn't matter to me what your conclusion is. I want you to explain to me, how do you reach that conclusion? Support your conclusion with examples and details. C, explain coded language and discuss LE 3 ways it is still commonly used, and you can use examples from the media or from personal observation. Okay? So again, make sure you're giving the detail in terms of how it is still commonly used, this coded language. Question 2 is from chapter 4. Discuss in detail the periods when affirmative action was white and not white. So if you review chapter 4, you'll see that the authors make a claim that there was a point in time when affirmative action benefited white people. That's what they call it, when affirmative action was white. That was the period during the Depression when some of the social welfare programs were started by then President Roosevelt, and many of these programs did in fact benefit whites, as well as after World War II, many soldiers coming back also benefited from some of the programs that the military put into place as well. Contrast that with when affirmative action was not white. That's the period during the late 1960s going through to today. Talk about those two periods. What were the programs that benefited whites? What were the programs that were targeted at benefiting people of color? And also consider how people responded to these programs. What I'm talking about here is when affirmative action was white, when the programs benefited whites, many people didn't really have a problem with that. It seemed okay. But when the focus shifted and people of color were now the beneficiaries of affirmative action, many people had a different view of it. And what was that difference? Should affirmative action continue to be used in college admissions? And there's information in the module about, and also the textbook to some degree, about how it is used in college admissions. And there's some information about a current case against Harvard University. In fact, we're expecting that the U.S. Supreme Court will issue its decision any day now in the Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard University case. We're expecting a decision in that case any day now. So discuss whether you think it should still be used in college admissions. And again, you can review some of the information in the module on this topic. Do you believe that affirmative action hurts white people, also known as reverse discrimination? Explain your answer. Again, it doesn't matter to me whether you say you agree or you disagree with the idea that affirmative action hurts or it works negatively against white people. Your answer is not as important as your explanation. How do you reach that conclusion? Explain to me. In your opinion, does redlining continue to have long-lasting effects? The authors of the textbook argue. Explain your answer. Again, there's information in the textbook. There's also a video that highlights or explains how redlining has continued to affect people even today. Question number 3 is from chapter 1. Explain the 5 fallacies about racism in detail and give examples of each fallacy. So if you review chapter 1, you'll see that there are 5 of them that the authors argue are fallacies, things that people believe but that aren't really true. And so after you explain what each one is and give an example of each, I ask you to discuss at least one instance when you have observed one of the fallacies at work. So you can either have observed this in a movie, in a TV show, in a personal interaction, in something you observed at work, etc. Explain the concept of intersectionality and discuss your intersectionality. Okay? So we all have intersectionality. We all have multiple identities. And so after you explain what intersectionality is, then talk about your own intersectionality and how does that influence your experience here in the U.S. I know from personal experience that being a brown Latinx female has at times been more, the intersectionality has been more influential in my experience and at other times less influential. So just think about your own intersectionality and discuss your intersectionality. And then, does your intersectionality make you feel more comfortable with some groups and less comfortable with others? For example, I find that I'm very comfortable around other Latinx people who come from a background similar to mine. However, I am less comfortable with Latinx people who, once they find out that I don't speak Spanish very well, treat me differently. It's as though they view me as not Latinx enough because I don't speak Spanish, which I personally think is ridiculous. Language is only one part of culture. Finally, explain symbolic violence and discuss how its presence and use in the U.S. helps to perpetuate racial inequality. Okay, so explain what it is, and then there's some information in the text about symbolic violence and how we can still see it around us. And you could, of course, even use an example or two of your own. The last question is from chapter 2. And in this question, I ask you to choose at least 2 philosophers or writers or scientists discussed in the chapter and discuss how their ideas about race help to form classification systems founded on white supremacy. So there were people who were influential in their thinking and in their writing, and others latched onto their ideas in the 15th and 16th centuries, and this idea of race and the superiority of some races and the inferiority of other races began to take shape. And so we see that that carried through well into the 20th century. And in fact, there are still some people who think that way. Think about the history you learned during your K through 12 education, and then explain at least 3 ways the information was different or only a partial version of the account you read about in the textbook. Okay? So think back to K through 12 education. What did you learn about, I don't know, say Thanksgiving? Or what did you learn about slavery? Or what did you learn about the civil rights movement, etc.? And how is that different from what you read in the textbook? And why do you think that this situation of this different or incomplete history continues to exist? All right, that is it. Make sure that you study all 4 of these, because remember, you will only be assigned 2 of them, but that's random. In addition to that, I strongly encourage you to at least make an outline for each of these questions so you have an idea of what you would write or talk about if you are assigned one question or the other. Also, you do have 2 attempts. So if you aren't as prepared as you thought when you log in and you see the questions you were assigned, you can log back out and you have one more try after that. There are some students who will write out a full answer to all 4 questions, and then they will log on, start the test. When they see which of the 2 questions they were assigned, they will copy and paste each answer into the submission box, and then they will click submit. That is not cheating. I'm okay with students doing that because they took the time to write out answers, full answers to every single question. Again, it is not cheating, and it just means these are students who really, truly would like to get an A, and almost always they do get an A because they do that much preparation. But you all know what kind of a student you are, what works best for you. So I can guarantee, though, if you study and you at least have an outline, you should do okay. But you do have 2 attempts.